Brandon, welcome to the platform. How you doing?
Good. Thanks for having me today.
Nah, thanks you for being here. I'm excited about this conversation. I'm glad you found out about the platform
Yeah,
from our good friend Joseph.
absolutely.
Um, and this is gonna be something unique that we haven't talked about on this platform specifically about disability justice, disability rights. What's the difference? Intersectionality, just
Yeah,
living access
right,
for our disabled community members.
right.
Before we get into that, I want to get into like your personal Alabama. What motivated and inspired you to get into this work? And let's start back at home for you in Alabama.
Yeah, so I grew up in North Alabama, kind of right between Huntsville and Birmingham.
Okay.
So in rural Blount County. It
Okay.
is Blount, not Blount. Some people get it wrong. And, it's rural community, very religious oriented. Um, and it's very white.
Okay.
Right? So, that kind of creates a culture and you know, a thought that people have about the way things should be. Right? And so I didn't really know anything beyond school, family, church.
Okay.
And, that's how we saw the world. And then, as I grew up and learned more through school and just having my own thoughts and, I read a lot, I was like, there is a world that's beyond this. There is a way of thinking that's beyond what I've known all my life.
Right.
And so I really tried to explore that.
So, what was that first moment where you realized, like, oh, I have a different perspective than probably people around me, including peers, family members, church members, whatever that may be?
Well, I think one of the first things is that I recognized how women were treated differently at church.
Okay.
And, that was certainly a big deal for me. I thought that's just not right.
Right.
There just wasn't an equal ability to talk.
Right.
And so that doesn't work for me. And then, I think also I recognized just how white we were. I had no people of color in the school I grew up in. And when we would, play sports against, other teams who did have black players or brown players or, people who were different from us, the invariable conversation was all about, how different they were and, racial slurs came out.
Right.
And I'm like, that's not right either.
Right.
And then also, I'm gay, and so I also recognized at 7 years old, which is the same age as my son, that I was very much, attracted to other boys, and not necessarily knowing what to do with that, but I was like,
Right.
that makes me different too. And so I just
Right.
started having this feeling inside of me of my world is going to be different than what I'm growing up with.
Right.
Now, when it comes to disability, which is a lot of what we're going to talk about today, my family has a genetic eye condition. It's called retinitis pigmentosa.
Okay.
And, it basically restricts our visual field.
Okay.
And so, I have less than 10% peripheral vision. So, like, if I put my hand over here, I can't see it.
Wow.
I can't see it until it gets about right there.
Wow.
And then same thing coming down and underneath. And so, I stumble over stuff a lot.
So a real blind side.
Yeah, very blindside, right?
Yeah.
I would never need to be a quarterback.
Right.
Playing football because I'd be Joe Theismann every single play, and I'd have a broken everything. But so I recognized early on too that that's what made me different, and I've never been able to look up and see the star field at night. Right, I have no concept of what that looks like other than what I've seen in pictures, but I've never seen it with my own eyes because not only does it change my peripheral vision, it also changes my ability to see in dark
Right.
situations or at night.
Wow.
I can't literally see the hand in front of my face.
Wow. So you're
Um,
definitely not a nocturnal
I
person.
am not a nocturnal person. Now, you give me some lighting
Uh-huh.
and you give me somebody to hold on to and get some help from,
Yeah.
I'm good to go.
Right.
But without those things, I'm much more tentative.
Right.
And there are some situations that I just don't engage in because of those limitations.
Right.
So I had to deal with that growing up
Mm-hmm.
too. Like I couldn't participate in certain things.
Right.
Or felt like I couldn't, right?
Mm.
There was, lots of situations where, like Halloween, for example, we're coming up on that time of the year. And
Right.
so, it was, a lot of things happen at dark, haunted houses, those kind of things. And I tried it and I just felt awkward
Yeah.
because the other thing I was taught and kind of the culture around me was that you can't show your weakness.
Mm.
Asking for help really is a sign that you can't make it
Right.
in this world. And so, not explicitly, but implicitly, I was
Mm-hmm.
very much taught that you don't show too much of yourself.
Right.
So, you either fake it till you make it, or you just hang back and don't participate.
Right.
So, while I knew I was different in all those other ways we talked about, I also recognized I was different from a disability perspective, but I was much less vocal about that. It wasn't until I was an adult that I really started to talk more about disability as part of who I am.
When you did start to talk about, especially growing up in Alabama in the South, when people are you just indoctrinated with the way of thinking, right? When you started, when you came out as gay specifically, right? What were those conversations like? And I'm just this is fascinating to me at this point. I didn't know I was getting
Wait
this.
till we talk about intersectionality.
Yeah,
You're
yeah,
gonna love that.
right, right. So yeah,
Yeah. I pretty much told everybody.
how old were you at
I
this
was
time?
24.
You was 24.
I
Okay.
think I was 24.
Okay.
So early 2000s.
Okay.
For those of you who see me on camera, I'm not as young as you think I look. No. So I was about 24. I'd come out to most everybody,
Okay.
except for my parents. I was
Okay.
living at home at the time. I'd, done a lot of experimentation as most people do in college.
Right.
And then I moved away after college and really started to come to terms with who I was and am, and finally came out to myself. And then I started coming out to other people. I'd moved back home. And so I had determined in my life that I was going to wait until I moved out again before I came out to my parents. And that didn't happen for a lot of different reasons. And when the moment came, I just kind of knew that this was the time it was going to happen.
Right.
And needless to say, it didn't feel good. It wasn't pretty. A lot of yelling, a lot of misunderstanding. I think a lot of grief that was happening with my parents
Right.
of, you're not the son we thought you were going to be or are
Right.
or whatever. Frankly, my mother was convinced I was a drug user, and
Wow.
I think she probably would have rather I'd been a drug user
Than
at the
being gay.
time, because I think she saw that as a fixable situation,
Right.
whereas being gay, wasn't necessarily. And so, but I will give credit to my parents. They didn't understand. They didn't necessarily know what to do with it.
Right.
But they were very supportive of me as their son.
Okay.
They never lost that unconditional love that parents have for their kids.
Okay.
And I'm very thankful for that because I
Right.
know so many people
Right.
that didn't have that.
Right.
And it took a long time to, evolve into a place where they were more accepting. My so I came to Nashville and went to grad school and at Vanderbilt and met who later became my husband, And even that was a transition of like, okay, well, he's gay, but then he's not involved with anybody.
Right.
And then it was, oh, he's involved with somebody.
Right.
And so that was a thing we had to get through as a
Right.
family. And then so it but my almost or would be husband, we were together for 13 years, and so it was a growing experience for all of us. And then by
Right.
the time we broke up 13 years later, and after having a son together and all those kind of things, it was very much like he was part of our family. He was seen as another son to my parents,
Right.
and so it was devastating for all of us
Yeah.
when that relationship broke up. But
What did you learn the most about like human beings, like people? Like, what did you take away from coming out to your community and just you being able to be your complete self internally anyway, right? But externally, like what did you see change within people once they knew you was gay? Did you lose people, find new people? What was that transition and evolution for yourself like?
yeah, so there were some people who I did lose as friends, people from high school. Actually, my best friend from high school has not spoken to me in 20 years after I came out. And while that hurt, I think one of the things that I've learned about people is that people get to make their own choices about their own life,
Right.
and what they choose to engage in and not.
Right.
And even though that choice is hurtful in a lot of ways to other people, it may be self-centered, it may be short-sighted in a lot of ways, people get to make their own choices, and the same way I do.
Right.
And so my philosophy is that as long as you're not being explicitly or implicitly hurtful to other people and you respect other people's humanity, I can kind of go with the choices you offer to the world. Now, when you get into that territory of not accepting other people's humanity,
Right.
or seeing people as being, inferior in some
Right.
kind of way just because of whatever situation,
Right.
then I get a little or a lot more testy.
Yeah.
Because I'm like, yeah, I mean, I'm a human like you're a human.
Right.
It's the whole thing about I put my pants on the way you put your pants on.
Yeah.
And so it's I try to live that philosophy as best I can. And so that's the one thing I learned about people.
Right. That's a good philosophy. That's one I think we have like similarities, because I personally would rather like to know if you don't like me, for whatever reason, long as that dislike doesn't lead to like discriminatory,
Yeah.
oppression, inferior thinking, or feel like, hey, you don't have to do certain things, or I can't be treated in an equal and equitable way because of like I'm short, or I'm tall, or I'm black, or I'm white, or I have short hair, long hair, I smoke cigarettes, I don't, I identify as a man, or whatever it may be. I think that's for me too. That's why I was like, okay, it's okay you don't like me, that's fine. But if I deserve this job, give me the job.
Right.
Type of thing.
But see me as a person.
Right, exactly.
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 And that, I think that's what matters. And
Right.
I think I have a T-shirt that I wear a lot that says "Be kind."
Okay.
That's the rule number one at our house. That I talk with my son about all the time is like, be kind.
Right.
When there's also a song about that. When there's nothing else we can do in the world,
Be kind.
let's be kind. Because that encompasses so much of, what we can do in the world and who we can be in the world.
Right.
Is, we talk about listening all the time. We talk about helping all the time. And we talk about, being active and having a voice.
Right.
But what it boils down to, from my perspective, is that's those are kind of outgrowths of kindness.
Right.
So if you can be kind, you can be those other things too.
Now, kind of pivoting into the disability space.
Yeah.
How did you get involved into that? And just what people know, Brandon is the executive director for Empower Tennessee, which we're going to get into shortly. But how did you find yourself being motivated and inspired to kind of lean into that? Because you could, I'm not saying that you don't, but you could have easily leaned into, the gay community, gay rights and those things too. But you found yourself leaning more and working directly with folks that are disabled.
Yeah, and I came later to that too,
Okay.
right? I think because of that hiding, like I hid more of my disability than I did my sexuality for a
Right.
long time, and again because it was that explicit and implicit, like
Don't show your
don't
weakness.
show your weakness,
Right.
right? Disability is weakness was kind of one of those myths, which
Right.
I think we're going to talk about too. Is um, so don't show that. And so, but I so my bachelor's degree is in education. So I wanted to be a school teacher from the time I was in kindergarten. Like that's what I wanted to do. And so I was determined all the way through elementary school and high school, like I'm going to be a teacher, and I was going to be a band director for all the way through high school. That's what I wanted to do. So I graduate from high school. I go to college, and I move in. I went to, or I started at the University of Southern Mississippi, and it was like 7 hours away from home. And but I was determined this is what I was going to do. I made it through 3 days of band camp, and then I was calling my parents like, "Come get me."
This is not for me.
This is not for me. I'm 7 hours away from home. I am with all these people I do not know, and
This is not American Pie band camp. This is not.
no, it was not that band camp. I think if I'd stayed longer, it might have become that, but it was not that at all. So I make it back home, then I'm trying to figure out what I want to do then, but I'm still determined, like I'm going to be a teacher. My second love was history, civics, government, things like that. So I went and got a social studies and social science degree, and from the University of North Alabama,
Okay.
closer to home, smaller campus, and so I did that, and got a teaching degree and went into teaching, and that's how I moved out of Alabama for the first time, moved to Georgia, and I taught for half a year. I was a mid-year replacement.
Okay.
And I had a culture shock. Not only was I living away from home again, but again, growing up in a pretty white community,
Right.
the school that I started teaching at not only had about 2,500, 3,000 students.
Wow.
So it was really
That's
big.
a huge
By the way,
school.
I graduated my high school with a class of 66.
Yeah.
So big culture change in terms of that.
Right.
But it was also like 60, 70% black.
Okay.
So again, it was not necessarily a thing of just like, this is a bad thing. It's just more of like, this is not what I'm used to.
Right.
And so it was basically just not a good experience.
So what did you learn from that experience? Like, and what did you learn about yourself? Right. Most importantly.
Well, frankly, that I wasn't meant to be a teacher. I mean, that's the frank answer is that I think I was into teaching because I liked what I liked.
Right.
I was like, I'm definitely into history. I'm definitely into all these aspects of learning, and I expected all my students to like it as much as I did,
Right.
which was obviously a quite naive proposition. And then I also learned just how young I was,
Yeah.
and had been pretty sheltered
Right.
through my life. I was also coming to terms with my sexuality at the same time, and so that was a bit of a struggle as well. And so that just didn't last very long.
I know you mentioned like on several occasions just how like your environment was just so white.
Yeah,
you grew up in.
Yeah.
Like, how did you respond or take to being more around people of color, specifically probably black folks, brown folks? What did you learn about yourself? Did you realize maybe you had some implicit biases, some things some stereotypes that you might have carried, didn't know they was there subconsciously? What was that growth like?
Yeah. So, I know this sounds weird. I was kind of excited to be around people of color, because I just didn't have that growing up.
Right.
And so it was kind of exciting to me to have people that I would connect with in college or when I was teaching or things like that. I had no concept of, implicit bias or white privilege or white fragility or any of those kind of things. That just never occurred to me. I just knew that, um, we historically and currently discriminated against people,
Right.
and that was unfair,
Right.
and it shouldn't be happening. But I really wasn't. I didn't see the broader or deeper picture.
Right.
And so I was one of those, good-meaning white people that, just like, no, this is wrong. But, I probably still said and did pretty racist things without knowing it.
Right.
And so, I really didn't start to realize that until, again, much, much later.
Much later, yeah.
And so, I recognize, and even today, I think I'm much more in tune
Right.
with the things that I, think and say, and I, try to recognize that the world is not the way I was brought up, or even the way I thought about myself or the world 20 years ago, or even 15 years ago. And so I appreciate the learning that I've done,
Yeah.
the things that I've been taught by other people.
Yeah.
So I appreciate, just having that experience. But, I think that,
Growth is amazing.
yeah, hell yeah, amazing. And that's, and I think we all need to do it, and we need to be seeking it out.
Yeah, intentional.
Intentional about
Yeah.
growth, because stagnation is not, literally not going to get you anywhere.
Right.
And if we think that we've got it figured out, or we think we know everything, even if we're a quote unquote expert about something,
Right.
no, that's a lie.
But I think the biggest part of your journey that aided you in doing that is like leaving that environment that you was in, right?
Yeah.
Because it's really easy for us to get comfortable and just stuck in our own community bubbles, right? Where most people think like we think. Things are easy. It's no really challenge or pushback on the way things are, right?
Yeah.
And then, but once you leave that, and if you're open to being challenged a little bit, or seeing new things, or being around people that you're not usually around, or to have no proximity to at all in your initial growing up community, like I think that promotes growth if you allow it.
Well, right. Absolutely. Well, I think growth is often born out of discomfort,
Yeah.
right? And you have to be willing to step into that, right? Because, so many people avoid that.
Yeah.
And they're like, oh, I can't do that. So let me seek out comfortability.
Right.
And then comfortability kind of keeps you stuck.
Yeah.
And nobody necessarily likes discomfort.
Right.
But it's the way we grow. It's the way we change. It's
Yeah.
the way we see new perspectives and, understand that we don't have it all figured out.
Right.
And, I like that kind of stuff too. Again, I don't seek out discomfort,
Right.
but what I do seek out is growth and change.
Yeah.
And, and I've been through a lot of discomfort
Yeah.
because of that.
Yeah, I think I'd seek out a little bit of like, how can I mental discomfort, like something that's gonna maybe challenge me or make me feel like, oh, do I really want to ask that question or go into that, or am I afraid of the response that I might get, or is it just uncomfortable, or would this question I may ask or a conversation I might have just be very discomforting and intense in a good way, but it just, so I tend to want to lean into those conversations, because the more we talk about them, the less discomforting they become.
Right.
And then I think we open up doors and avenues for other people to talk about them as well. And that's why I'm so excited about what you do, but also how it could possibly open up doors for people to also that's listening and watching and start thinking about what disability justice and rights are, especially if you don't have a disability yourself. You're probably not even thinking about it. And so hopefully this conversation does that, even if it's a little discomforting.
Yeah, I hope so. Because, I think that's part of the work and the experience that we have as people
Right.
with disabilities is people know we exist but don't know we exist,
Right.
right? And so there's that lack of respect and recognition
Yeah.
that often comes with that reality. And it's it's frustrating, frankly.
Right.
And I think that, I mean, I obviously can only speak from my own perspective, but same thing with being gay, right? I mean, in the LGBTQ community of like, we just want to be seen as other human beings. We want to be recognized for who we are,
Right.
right? But we also want to be recognized as somebody who has our own experience, our own feelings, our own desires, our own voice,
Right.
and the right to exist the way we want to exist.
Right.
And so it's the same thing about having a disability, right? So many people see disability as a weakness, as something that is put aside or put away. It's an afterthought in our society so many times.
Right.
But people with disability make up the largest marginalized community in the world. And I think people don't get that.
Yeah.
Because we intersect with every other population
Right.
around the world.
Right.
So when you talk about, intersectionality, you think about, people who have a disability, but who may also be black,
Right.
who may be a woman,
Right.
who may be gay,
Right.
who may be, is homeless.
Right.
Right, and who may be a refugee.
Right.
I mean, who don't speak English. I mean, so you can think about all the different marginalized communities that exist,
And then put disability on
and you
top.
put disability on top of that.
Yeah.
And so you're hitting all of those societal markers of difference that just deepen that sense of trauma,
Right.
that sense of being an outsider, that sense of the world doesn't see me, care about me, pay attention to me.
Right.
And so that's why I like having these kind of conversations, because it brings to light that disability is part of the human condition, right? It is something that you can both see and not see.
Right.
Right. I have 3 types of disabilities, none of which you can really see.
Right.
Right. And so we think about disability and we think about people who are wheelchair users, or we think about people who are blind or deaf, or
amputee,
people who have amputations or things like that. And so that's what we think about as a physical,
right,
noticeable disability, as it
right.
were. But the vast majority of people with a disability have invisible disabilities, and so. And that's, again, not recognized.
Right.
Of course, so many people think about autism because, the varied amounts of people who say, oh, my brother is autistic, or my cousin is autistic. I mean,
Right.
that's the other side of, how people understand disability or think about it in our
Right.
community, is that, oh, well, I have another, a family member
Right.
who is that. And so there's this sense of I know because.
Right.
But the thing is that it's about what the person with the disability thinks and feels and sees and experiences. And that's part of the work that we're involved in.
Right.
Is people with disabilities have the same rights as everybody else to speak for themselves.
Right.
Even if you're nonverbal, there's usually a way in which you communicate.
Right.
And so why not let people with disabilities have their own voice the way you do? It's so important.
Disability rights versus disability justice. I was doing my research, and this is a difference. And so can you talk to us a little bit about that difference between somebody that says I want disability rights and then somebody that says I want disability justice?
Yeah, and I think there is a important distinction there.
Right.
Right. So rights is very much built into, a legal sense of, and constitutional sense of our society, right? And so, we think about what I have access to legally the same way people who don't have a disability have access to. So that may be, the way we rode up in an elevator today, right? And if I was a person who was a wheelchair user, right, how would I do that otherwise to be on whatever floor we're on and so if there was just stairs, then I couldn't participate. I couldn't do, right? And so from a legal standpoint, I have the same right to access what everybody else does, right? Having the same, rights to an education, right? Being able to go to public schools at every level and be given accommodation to do that. So that's rights, right? The things that we are entitled to as Americans, as human beings, right? Justice is much more based in, a socioeconomic standpoint, right? And I think we talk a lot about ableism, right? Which is just as real and just as prevalent as racism, misogyny, and other types of discrimination and seeing people as other. And so if you look around our community, even just here in Nashville, right, you can see the way our society is built on an ableist point of view, right? So, and that, again, disability is seen as an afterthought, right? But then you also kind of pull in those aspects of intersectionality, right? So, if a person, so not only is the world built on an ableist model, it's built on a racist model and a misogynistic model. And so when we talk about justice, we're talking about the level of visibility, the level of respect, the level of, inclusion and choice that we don't experience. And so, again, not to over-equate or, appropriate other people's movements, but it is akin to so many of the other justice work that's happening in our community.
Why do you feel that the disability part of those intersexualities are not like at the forefront, right? When we think about like people that are unhoused or sexuality rights or like people of color, all these things, right? Why don't disability justice is reproductive justice, all these things, right? Why is disability justice and rights not up there in the forefront and not being talked about as much?
I ask myself that question all the time. Like, what is it about us? What did we do to deserve this, lack of recognition? I think because we, as people with disabilities, and I'm talking about a broader community, we were put away for generations, right? And when I say put away, literally, like we were put in institutions and forgotten by society, by families, and so, and we're also seen by a lot of people in society, again, traditionally, as consumers of resources, and that we have no real capacity to contribute, right? People with disability can't work, people with disabilities, they just live off government benefits,
just need assistance,
and they need assistance, and we ain't got time for that, basically, and you need too needy, you need too much, and so I think that's part of the ingredients here of not being seen the way others are. But again, if you go back to what I said before, of we also intersect in those other areas.
Right.
And so you think about a black woman who is lesbian and maybe came here from Africa,
Right.
and as a refugee maybe, and but then also blind.
Right.
Well, she may be seen as worthy of resources
Right.
for so many of those other marginalized identities.
Mm-hmm.
The disability will usually come last,
Mm.
because our society's just not built for it. Well, we hear, well, what do I do with a blind person? How do I help them? What do I
Right.
do with a person who, you know, um, uh, is nonverbal? Oh my
Right.
gosh, how do I have a conversation with them?
Right.
And so, because you can handle refugee, you can handle black, you can handle lesbian, you can handle woman, right? Those are seen as manageable,
Right.
right? We can understand those more.
Right.
Not that we really do all the time, but I'm just saying, comparatively, disability is something that people just don't have as part of what they think about.
And I've always said this, and I'm in the practice of this now, learning American Sign Language.
Oh,
I
great.
just think it's something that should be taught in school.
Yeah.
Like, because even if you're in a situation where you must be quiet because of danger, like American Sign Language could help, could aid you, right?
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, at the very least, I think that it should be. I think basic sign language
Right.
should be a good thing. I think certainly offering it as an elective.
But
For
we have
schools, yeah.
Spanish, we have French, we have all these things in
Yeah.
like middle high school. But American Sign Language in public schools that I know of has not been like offered.
No.
Yeah.
'Cause it's again.
Yeah.
Why would we do that? There aren't that many deaf
Yeah.
people in the world. We're never gonna encounter them.
Right.
And if we have to, we'll figure it out.
Well, something that blew my mind, and I was like, this is what made me realize, like, oh, I have to get my American Sign Language down, because it just took me off guard. I was at Chick-fil-A in what Chick-fil-A was I was at? Hermitage.
Mm-hmm.
And I was getting a beverage. I was getting a meal, and I was getting a beverage. And one of the staff members there was deaf.
Mm-hmm.
And it totally I just didn't expect it.
Mm-hmm.
Because I was talking to him, and like I forgot how he kind of let me know, like, oh, like I can't verbally like communicate with you. But I was like, oh snap. And I was like, and I was trying to think, of like what, like just beverage,
Yeah.
I mean, I was speaking too, because I know, many
Right.
of them can,
Yeah.
read lips. But I was trying to use hands and stuff, and I just sat there and was like, I was so embarrassed.
Mm-hmm.
I was really embarrassed. I was like, wow, the fact that like me just expecting that everybody that I come in contact with is going to be able to verbally communicate with me made me feel so ashamed at that moment.
Sure. Yeah. And it kind of goes back to what we were talking about, that uncomfortability
Yeah.
that leads to growth.
Right.
And so I think that was one of those moments for you.
Yeah,
Right.
I was like, damn.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's part of the experience, right?
Mm-hmm.
Is that people don't expect.
Yeah.
You don't expect. And I mean, I'm not sitting here as being, the perfect person who, recognizes everything about what's possible in the disability world, and that I don't, get it wrong sometimes, because I
Right.
do.
Right.
And we all will.
Right.
Right. And so you learn through the experience. But I think that kind of goes back to the idea that, you said you didn't expect.
Yeah, I didn't.
And I think that's the vast way of thinking for most
Yeah.
Americans, Western culture,
Right.
is that we don't expect people with disabilities to be in our spaces.
No. Like, and think we have signals around us all the time, right? Handicap accessible parking,
Mm-hmm.
the handrails in the bathrooms. You gotta have your doors got to be a certain square. Like, we have all these things in place, but like it just, we just don't notice them because the proximity, either we don't have a disability or our proximity to that community is just non-existent. So
Right.
we just go through life like, oh, everybody is just, like us,
Right.
possibly. And it's just, but I just remember that moment, and I was like, like,
Yeah.
why do I feel, why I shouldn't feel, one, I shouldn't feel embarrassed, but two, I shouldn't automatically just think like every person I encounter is gonna be able to have the same tools or whatever that I
Yeah.
have to communicate, to mobilize or whatever way they may, and it just really made me think more about it. What can I do? And that's
Right.
all, and also like how, and I want to throw this question out to you: how can the non-disabled community be in community with the disabled community with integrity, right? Not assuming that, hey, let me get this for you, I'll have to do that for you. What does that look like? What do those tools look like for us to be able to, when I say us, the non-disabled community, to be able to like just have a wholesome relationship with a disabled person or with our disabled community, and know kind of the things to look for
Yeah.
or to ask, or how to ask in the most appropriate way.
Yeah. Good question. So I think the best way to start is you assume competence
Okay.
in people, right? And so you see someone who's a wheelchair user, coming into your building, or at the restaurant or whatever, and you know, not seeing them as someone who immediately needs help. So, because we need help, people
Right.
who are non-wheelchair users,
Right.
right? We need help with things too, and people
Right.
aren't rushing to our aid
Right.
all the time.
Right.
So, assuming competence in people, I think, is a really, fundamental place to start. You also have to recognize that people with disabilities have a responsibility
Right.
to, like everybody else,
Right.
to ask for what they need.
Right.
And so, um, if I, as a person who has a visual disability, need someone in a dark situation to help me get down steps,
Right.
right? I'd be like, "Hey, Drum, can I take your arm
Right.
so that, I don't fall down these steps?"
Right.
Right? Because let me tell you, it happens. Yeah,
Yeah.
so I have a responsibility to ask for what I need.
Right.
So, but the other side of that is, and you asked about, how do you ask a person if they need something? The same way you'd ask anybody else.
Okay.
And I think that's, again, part of the point.
Yeah.
We're not different than everybody
Right.
else.
Yeah.
We just experience the world in a
Right.
slightly different way. And we talk about how different is good, right? Disability is, again, not something to be ashamed of. It's not
Right.
something that we really should be hiding. There's a sense of pride that can come with
Right.
having a disability, because, again, it's part of who I am.
Right.
It's part of how I experience the world.
Right.
I don't need to be cured
Right.
from what I experience, how I experience the world. But so much of society is built on that idea of incompetence,
Right.
do-gooder syndrome of, oh, let me help you and I'll feel good about myself.
Right.
And, that we just need to find a way to see people as they are, and let them be themselves.
I want to throw this at you because I think a lot of these things come from what we see:
Yeah.
propaganda, TV shows,
Oh,
movies,
yeah.
all of these things, right? And I forgot what it is coined and what it is called, and it's a movement I know, but I can't remember the name. But it's where there's a character playing in a movie or show or something, and they have some type of physical disability, and persons with that physical disability usually end up as like a villain or
Oh, yeah.
or like kind of cast typed in a certain role, and that a disability is attached to that role. I think a lot of those things, because we see it a lot. It's like, oh, okay, so like somebody is with this disability is always this way. Therefore, subconsciously, maybe when I see somebody in real actual life that maybe have that same physical disability, my mind automatically goes to he or she is this type of person.
Right.
How has and how can I should ask, how can propaganda, entertainment, media promote better, healthy education and learning about our disabled community, and how hasn't it?
Well,
right? Right.
Well, I think how hasn't it is that, like so many other things, it's tokenism, right? We'll throw a disabled character in the mix just so that we can say we did,
Right.
And so that's part of it.
Right.
And was it? I'm trying to remember. Was it the original Texas Chainsaw Massacre that had a character that was in a wheelchair? Your audience may know this, and so they'll send us some
Yes.
comments or whatever. But I'm trying to remember. I mean, long years ago. But I think they were in that. But I don't know this for sure, but I would almost guarantee he was not actually a wheelchair user.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. And so that's the other part of it, is that, number one, not being represented at all or
Right.
very little as a token. But the other side of it, too, is that oftentimes you have people without disabilities playing people with disabilities.
Right.
Right. Because there may be a level of assuming incompetence. You may have to make an accommodation.
Right.
Right. And that, it's just not possible. And I'm not saying that, you have to be equal to equal, right?
Right.
Because you have, women playing men and men playing women, and gay characters playing straight characters, and vice versa. I mean, so I'm not saying that it has to happen all the time, but it certainly needs to happen a lot more.
Right.
Where people with disabilities are seen as capable and good
Right.
actors. And so I think we need to be better at that. I think the also thing is, stereotypes are real in
Right.
the sense of, like, we play to stereotypes.
Right.
And, as you were talking about, well, we kind of, have been taught through media that this is how a person with cerebral palsy acts, and that's how it's going to be, right? And that's so every person with cerebral palsy, we should experience this way, or every person who is blind, we see as this thing.
Right.
Well, forgive me for saying this, but I mean, that's tantamount to saying all black people look the same to me.
Right. Yeah.
And so, we need to get out of that idea that all parts of a particular population experience the world in exactly the same way. Because it's so not true. That's not true of any population.
Right.
And so, again, I think people with disabilities have been traditionally, historically, societally, everything you can think of to put on top of that, forgotten, disrespected, marginalized. And I think that's the fundamental fight we have today.
Another thing that we see a lot of times in these films and these movies is like independent living experiences, right? Which I really want you to dive into.
Yeah.
We see, parents getting older, or you have a family member or even a child or something like, hey, it's something I can't handle. Let me put him or her in this, independent living home or facility, or this, I just don't want to deal with it, right? And a lot of times, even in those facilities, it might be portrayed that they're not taking care of the community that's in there, or whatever it may be. And just the idea of even getting a loved one or somebody that might have a disability to a phase, to a part where they can be independent in their living in general, right?
Right.
Sometimes this goes over our head, like, oh, they always have to have support or help,
Right.
or whatever. Talk to us a little bit about that independent living experience, and like even what Empower Tennessee does around
Yeah,
that.
so it's really interesting. So, I think you talk about independent living mostly in that as a lowercase I, lowercase L, right? And so we think about independent living as a a thing,
Right.
right? So you're living either on your own, and I think some of the things that you were talking about are very akin to assisted living,
Right.
which is tantamount to nursing home care,
Right.
frankly. But the thing is, you know, independent living, the way we practice it, is a philosophy that is capital I, capital L,
Okay.
right? And it was born out of, a belief and a movement of the late 60s, early 70s that kind of came out of deinstitutionalization. People who were in nursing facilities and had been locked away just because they had disability. Being like, no, that's not how I want to live. I have
Right.
the right to live the way I want to live and make my own choices. And so there's kind of the father of the independent living movement. Was in California. He had polio as a young person, and it progressed into the point where he basically lived his life in an iron lung.
Right.
And he was like, but I want to go to college.
Right.
And so everybody was like, no, you can't go to college.
Right.
You're in an iron lung. I mean, that was, we can't do that.
Right.
And this is University of California, Berkeley, I believe. And so he pushed for his rights, and they finally admitted him. And he got a degree, but then he met other young people with disabilities in that community who were going through similar experiences, and
Right.
people with all types of disabilities, right?
Right.
And so together they formed the first Center for Independent Living,
Wow.
which still exists. It's called The CIL, so CIL, and it still exists in Berkeley today. And I think they're celebrating like their 50th anniversary this year.
Wow.
And so it was built on this philosophy that people with disabilities are the best voices for their own needs.
Right. Yeah. Like everybody else.
Like everybody else.
Yeah.
Right. And that we have the right to be and deserve to be included
Right.
in conversations that are about us and benefit our lives.
Right.
So the whole "nothing about us without us" kind of mantra.
Right.
And that there are some fundamental services that kind of come along with that. And so, at Empower Tennessee, we practice those services and that independent living philosophy of, we want to make sure that people get the, access to the information and resources
Right.
that are available to them.
Right.
So where can I find this? Where can I go for that? Right. And the other piece of that is also peer support, right? So having other people with disabilities who've experienced the world
Right.
in a way that they get what it means to be discriminated against. They get what it means to live in an ableist society.
Right.
They get what it means to struggle with other intersectionalities.
Right.
Right. So facilitating opportunities for people to come together and talk about those. And, like at Empower Tennessee, we have, a group that's dedicated to, people who identify as male and have a disability. Same for people who identify as female. So they talk about a lot of different things
Right.
that are appropriate to their experiences, right?
Right.
We also have one for blind and low vision people.
Right.
We have one that's just focused to aspects around employment and housing
Right.
issues. And so, and we're about to start some kind of emotional support
Right.
groups as well. But they're peer driven,
Right.
right? So it's about, we provide the opportunity, the space, all the things that you need to set up for like Zoom meetings and all
Right.
this other kind of stuff and whatnot. But the people of the group are facilitating the group,
Right. They're
right?
leading it.
And leading it,
Yeah.
and figuring out what the conversations are going to
Right.
be, and have, and keeping people connected.
Right.
And then you can form individual relationships based on that. And so that's, part of why peer support's important. The other thing is about advocacy. People with disabilities, finding their own voice, using their own voice, and talking about what they need for their individual life, whether
Right.
it's with their family, their friends, their job, their school, their grocery store,
Right.
wherever it is that they were
Right.
like, this is what I need, and this is what I kind of want you to help do that. The other side of that is also collectively coming together to talk about policy issues
Right.
that affect people with disabilities. In Nashville a few years ago, we had the micromobility scooter issue,
Yeah.
right? And so there was a lot of people with disabilities, particularly people who were blind and low vision, who were deeply concerned about the way, number one, that we had a lot of them when they
Right.
first came around, and that they were just being haphazardly
Just put anywhere.
Just put anywhere.
Still.
It was still, that's true. I've
Yeah.
noticed that it's not quite as bad as it was.
Yeah.
But it was tremendously problematic in the early days.
No, what's crazy is I would have never thought about that. It's just, but somebody that maybe has maybe blind
Yeah.
and then knows their steps, and you're not expecting a 4 or 5 rows of scooters to be there.
That's right.
Wow.
That's right. And so, we went
Wow.
and advocated with a lot of different policy, makers, and we had meetings with a lot of the scooter companies themselves.
Right.
Some were open, some were not. But those who were, we had a really good deep dish conversation with them about how can you see
Right.
this experience and make changes for that experience.
So would it be fair to say myself as not being like disabled, have privilege, a privilege that how could myself and others use that privilege that we have to build solidarity, but also use that privilege to amplify disabled voices and give and say, hey, I'm not disabled, but I know somebody who is. And since you listen to me, I want you to listen to them because they're the best ones to tell you what is happening and what they need access to. What is the best way to do that?
Yeah. So number one, I think kind of opening your mind and experience to when you experience places you go and things that you do. Like,
Right.
could a person who was in a wheelchair do this? Could a person who was blind do this?
Right.
Could a person who is has sensory issues, like
Right.
loud sounds, flashing lights, all that kind of stuff, could they do this without being for people with a wheelchair, is there a step into a business?
Right.
Well, that's not going to work.
Right.
Right? If or you go into a business and things are all crowded together,
Right.
they're not going to be able to navigate that well.
Right.
So thinking about it from a broad perspective, is this accessible, basically?
Right. Have you done that? Have you went into restaurants
Oh
or
my
businesses
gosh.
and just been eating and say, hey, just so you know.
I kind of live the world in which I'm like, oh, that doesn't work, and then I'll usually, I'll make mention to it to a server,
Right.
if I see somebody or whatever,
Right.
or sometimes, I'll get back to the office, and be if I can find an email or whatever,
Right.
I'll be like, and this isn't, so a lot of people think about, are always afraid if we contact them that we're somehow the disability police and that we're out to,
Right.
Get them into a lawsuit or anything
Right.
like that. And that is so not what we do.
Right.
We're about education and
Right.
advocacy, right? When it comes to businesses in general, and that goes for all types of businesses, accessibility is good business.
Right.
Because the more people that you can have in your space or part of your clientele,
Right.
the more money you're going to get,
Right.
and the more you're going to prosper from that
Right.
experience. And the other side of that too is it's almost unpaid advertising as well, because people with disabilities, when they have a good accessibility experience,
Right.
they tell their friends. And so, I think that it's really important that there be that recognition.
Right.
But also, if you're in spaces where, you may be a member of a board, you may be on a committee,
Mm-hmm.
planning something. And, even if it does or doesn't come up about, people with disabilities and how, they fit into all this,
Yeah.
it's, oh, yeah, maybe we should have somebody who does that.
Yeah.
And not again as a token, not
Right.
again as an afterthought, but
Right.
also like, oh, people with
Yeah.
disabilities are going to come to this event.
Yeah.
Let's have somebody with disabilities be part of this planning process.
Yeah.
Get to
Man.
know people with disabilities.
Yeah, you really blowing my mind right now, because now you got me thinking, how many people do I know?
More than you think.
That have a disability, and I'm trying to think beyond just like what I noticeable, right?
Right.
And thinking about that. Wow.
Well, and disability is the thing that, like I came late in life to, or knowing about my other two disabilities, right? One being kind of on the mental health spectrum, and the other
Right.
one on an autism spectrum, right? And so
Right.
I was late to that game.
Right.
And so wouldn't have known how to talk about it even 5-10 years ago.
Right.
And the other thing about that is that's where a lot of people are. And some people still don't want to talk about their disability.
Right.
Some people who actually have a disability don't see it as a disability.
Right.
So there's that whole sense of an internal
Right.
struggle that people have about their own identity.
Right.
And so not everybody's like me coming to talk, about
Right.
all the things that are going on in my life and how
Right.
things can be better or different. And that's okay.
Yeah.
But I think there are plenty of people out there who would love to be included
Right.
in conversations, who would love to be given choice
Mm-hmm.
about how things happen in their life.
Right.
And that's, you were talking about like what can folks do is like, yeah, don't try to talk for somebody,
Right.
right? Like I am not going to speak for you as a black man,
Right.
right? I don't know your experience. I don't
Right.
know what your needs or goals or feelings are about the way the world works,
Right.
or doesn't.
Right.
But don't talk to me. Don't talk to other people about my experience as a disabled.
Right. You broke down the solidarity piece for us of how somebody like myself could build power with someone that may be a part of the disabled community. To close us out, could you just build maybe on that and some terminology and stuff too, and then on like some myth busters, and then we can take us home.
Yeah, so there's a lot of myths out there about people with disabilities, right? And I think I mentioned some of those before. Like number one, like you can't work.
Right.
Right, if you have a disability. And particularly within the disability community too, is like if you get Social Security disability benefits or something like that, that you can't work, right? Or that you'll lose your benefits. And, without going into a ton of detail, Social Security actually has a program, it's called Ticket to Work, that allows people to try work if they want to,
Okay.
after they either become disabled or they're on benefits for the first time.
Right.
Or even if they've had a lifelong disability, if they want to try to work and see if that'll do anything for them. And if so, and they find a career that they want to get involved in, then, they can work themselves off benefits in
Right.
some kind of way. But people, both who have a disability and those who don't, like, you can't work. Not only because you're not capable, but also because, Social Security doesn't allow for that.
Right.
People with disabilities can't have like romantic relationships, right? You can't fall in love. You don't have the capacity to do that. You can't have sex,
Right.
Those kind of things, which is completely untrue,
Right.
right? And you may be amazed what, and that's probably even not a good way. Well, how creative, I guess is the way I want to say that. How creative people, particularly like wheelchair users,
Right.
can
It's
be.
not wheelchair bound.
Not wheelchair bound.
It's
Thank
wheelchair
you.
users.
Wheelchair user, because nobody's bound to it. It also has
Right.
this connotation of like, there's something wrong with it.
Right. I just learned that, y'all. So don't,
Yeah.
I'm not. Brandon just taught me that. Right then.
We are always learning, and that's okay.
Yeah, for sure.
So yeah, the thing is that people who are wheelchair users, they can be pretty creative about their sex life. and enjoy it. And so
Yeah.
I'm like, more power to you, man.
Yeah, for sure.
Or that people with disabilities can't be just like they're all nice and they're just looking for a rosy world and everything's just roses and all that kind of stuff. Let me tell you, there are some people with disabilities who are complete assholes.
They have all the personality traits and characters that people that are not disabled.
Right. I mean, there's some, well-meaning people out there. They're just like everybody else, and that's the point.
Right.
Like, there will be people with a disability of all types, and even those that we tend to love.
Right.
We seem to have more affection for people with Down syndrome and people with muscular dystrophy. All Jerry's kids back in the day when we did the telethons. We all believe in that. And so it was like, they are so sweet and we just love them.
Right.
They can be complete shits to people, really. And so, recognizing that, not everybody is, sweet and loving and, just the best thing in the world and all that kind of stuff. So that's just not the way it is. We're like everybody else.
Right.
And, and so I think those are some of the big ones.
Okay.
Or that we don't enjoy, going places or doing things, or like people with disabilities don't go to a bar.
Right.
Yeah. Or that people with disabilities don't go to concerts, and
these places just need to make sure that they have access,
that they're accessible,
and
more people with disabilities would go if they had the access all the time. And so I think that's also part of the fight is. It's not just about access, but it's also about seeing the need for those kind of things. Thinking about how I want to, leave this conversation is that, number one, the conversation continues, and I hope it does in many different circumstances. Like, I hope people who hear and see this start to think about their own biases, their own privilege.
For sure.
That, the way they view people with disabilities in their own life, if they, have family members or friends or whatever. But also if you have a disability yourself, about seeing that as a source of pride and identity and opportunities to really flourish in the world. Right? It doesn't have to be something that's like, a horrible thing. It can be a great thing. And so I hope people continue conversations. Empower Tennessee, we serve here in Nashville, Davidson County, and the other counties that are around us. We all types of disabilities. So it doesn't matter, what you consider your disability to be. If you have more than one, whatever. We will work with you, and it's really about the goals that you want to have to be more independent, being more included, having more choice, being as independent as you want to be. And sometimes that's not just about living on your own. It's about making the choices of where you want to live, who you want to live with, who you want to be your support system. Right, you making those choices, and not other people doing it for you, and that's really our work, right? That's what we want to be about for our neighbors and our community, and then to continue having conversations like this, so people can know more about who we are and what we're about, and be respectful.
Brandon, this was amazing. Like, this is like, and all my conversations are usually amazing, but I think this one is just uniquely amazing because, again, my own proximity, but I also think too, just every day, like, enough people are not thinking about our disabled community members and helping them build and building with them in solidarity, and think about in our daily lives, like, could a disabled person that's a wheelchair user enter this space? Or if somebody had, some type of sight impairment, could they be able to like navigate this place or whatnot under these conditions? So I thank you for putting it not only on my mind more, but hopefully also the watchers and the listeners, and so we can like truly make this world a better, equitable place for everyone. And also just remembering, like, disabled folks and community, like they're just human beings that are great, have attitudes, and all of these other things that we all carry around with us every day. So this is amazing, and it's again, like, we shouldn't have to talk about it, but we have to talk about it because enough people are not talking about it.
Right.
And so I appreciate you just as giving us your story, your journey, being vulnerable, and then bringing it home with just like building solidarity with just community as a whole, and recognizing that there is other community out there that needs to be recognized more, and the most marginalized community, and all the intersectionality that goes into that, coupled with everything else that person may identify with being. And so this was powerful. I hope you enjoyed it. I enjoyed it.
I loved it.
I
This
enjoyed
was so
it.
much fun.
And I want to bring you back.
Yeah.
I definitely want to
Love to
bring
come
you back because I just think, like, even just for my own, like, just growth and being in these conversations, but also just for the audience, I think we just need to continue these type of things when we talking about social change. So thank you for your time, for your humbleness, for your meekness, just for your whole bouquet of flowers to you, for all the work that you are doing, have done, and going to continue to do for the Middle Tennessee area. So thanks, Brandon, and until next time.
All right. Thanks so much.